Have you ever not slept for so long that you started hallucinating? What was your experience?
Yeah, after 70 hours or so. It's pretty disorienting and rational thinking starts to get very slow. The hallucinations are not realistic but are more like gaps in your vision that are shaped like things. Might see a silhouette at a distance or briefly around a corner. Very difficult to function in this state. Would not recommend. At the 24-hour mark, one start to no longer feel tired and start getting into a slightly euphoric, calm state. At 36 hours, my short-term memory goes to shit, unable to keep any train of thought. Visual and auditory hallucinations are common. Up to the 48-hour mark, my speech starts slurring until I can't even complete sentences. My brother Doc says that when you're sleep deprived, your brain actually shuts off for tiny time slices, like microseconds, every second. The more deprived, the longer the shutdown. I'm generally sleep deprived, and when I read books to my children, my eyes will drift closed and I will keep talking like I'm reading the book, but it's not words in the book. My kids are pretty patient. During exam week, I pulled 3 all-nighters in the library between tests. The library was open 24 hours, so I'd just stay up all night making note cards, then go take an exam during the day. I lived off campus and didn't want to spend the gas money. I'd go to the most isolated area, but the library would pretty much be cleared out by midnight. I started to see glimpses of people and I thought it was a bunch of students fucking with me, but there was no one on that floor. I thought the lights went off at some point and maybe it was a sensor, so I started jumping around to reactivate it, but obviously, it was light the whole time. After a while I start to become seriously paranoid and I start hearing voices and things like that. It's not very fun. I have some serious issues with sleep, and sometimes it will get to the point where I will start seeing things out the corners of my eye that aren't actually happening, and I manage to scare the shit out of myself. Please get enough sleep. Don't fall into the habit of staying up for days on end. The longer you stay up, the harder it is to fall asleep.
A buddy of mine landed a painting job working inside of a big commercial building, and he basically stayed in the place for 6 days straight smoking crystal meth and painting to meet his deadline and avoid hiring a crew to help him. On the 6th day the building caught fire and he ran into the lobby and was pulling people out into the streets and yelling to call 911. The firemen showed up and couldn't locate a fire because there was none. He was hallucinating. Ex-addict. Was driving home after a 3-day meth bender. Needed food, so drove into a McDonald's drive-thru. When asked for my order I replied, "McChicken meal, please." Then they asked me again and I said, "McChicken meal, please." Then they asked me again and I was like, "Can't you fucking hear me? McChicken meal." And that's when I realized I wasn't actually saying anything, I was just replying in my head. I used to abuse Adderall and would stay up 3 days straight working on bullshit projects that I never finished. Anyway, one time I was at the end of a 3-day bender where I had taken about 10 days worth of Adderall. As I laid down to sleep, I started hearing my mom arguing with my brother and his girlfriend. It went on for a long time and I was like, surely they have to be at work and this shit will end soon. Eventually my brother's baby started to cry and the adults were too busy arguing to calm her down. I said, "Fuck that," and stormed out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and the house was completely empty. I hadn't slept for about 72 hours when I went to the Doc gave me Ambien. I go home, get in bed and take one. A few minutes later, the floor was covered in water and the walls were melting. It was raining outside and the water on my windows was marching in formation. I've never known whether that was sleep deprivation or the effects of Ambien. I've never taken another. Ambien is a horrible drug. I would take one, get amnesia, take another because I forgot I had already taken one, forget, take another. Tried hiding the bottle from myself, but amnesia self knew and took more. Once, as the amnesia was kicking in, I thought, I wish I had some Reese's cups, too bad there aren't any in the house. Snap of the fingers, I wake up the next morning with half-eaten toast covered with peanut butter and cocoa powder on my chest and on a plate on my bed. Cocoa powder everywhere. My best guess was I tried to make my own Reese's cups. In addition, I apparently burned several rounds of toast because I had thrown them outside. I also sent garbled emails. Work emails. Before the amnesia fully kicked in, I hallucinated the following: my blue sheets and my bed turned into an ocean. A pile of clothes on my dresser turned into a spinning pile of clothes shooting colorful strobe lights. I hid under my sheets because that's fucked up and disturbing. The folds of the sheet turned into the faces of old people. Their mouths moved in sync with mine. If I poked the faces, they would disappear and reappear as a different face. Needless to say, I stopped taking it after a week. Thank God I never drove anywhere. This was up there as one of my worst decisions ever. I was in college and had been incredibly sick for weeks. Coughing so bad through the night I was only getting 1 to 2 hours of sleep. At the worst of that, I was desperate and took a dose of codeine cough syrup, NyQuil, and small amount of Ambien to try and get a few hours of sleep before a midterm. I'm sure everyone can guess where this is going, but I still couldn't sleep and ended up with total rainbow walls, floating wavy bed, and phantom music for about 5 hours. It was utterly terrifying and definitely very dangerous. Do not recommend. I suffered from horrific insomnia about 12 years ago. I was on Lexapro and one of the side effects is insomnia. At the time, that wasn't well documented. So I tried everything from Ambien to alcohol so I could sleep. I would usually get about a 3-hour nap at most before being awake again. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping. Eventually, I hit the point of desperation and start recreational substances to try and knock myself out. There were several occasions of hallucinations, but the one that sticks out is truly terrible. I was on day 6 without sleeping at least 5 hours. I was laying in bed and a friend came in to start talking with me. We had many great conversations since our friendship began but hadn't talked in a while at that point. I told him how bad I was struggling and that honestly, killing myself would have been easier. He said he felt the same way many times, but that it was a terrible idea and I knew how badly it had messed up his family. When I looked at him, he was a bloody mess on the side of his face. Jaw ripped apart, teeth missing, but talking to me like nothing was wrong. He had been dead for a few years at that point. Suicide. Shot himself in his garage after years of substance abuse. And I just had a 3-hour conversation with a hallucination of a dead friend. I ended up switching meds to Celexa and my sleep issues disappeared within a month. So, if you are having sleeping issues, please, go see a doc. It's a dark place that damn near took me. I stayed up for 3 days straight when I was 17. On the 3rd day, I kept hearing people call my name as if they wanted to ask me a question. It didn't help that I also thought it would be a good idea to go to school that day. Multiple times a day, I would bolt upright and look around to see who wanted to my attention only to see my fellow students huddled over their work. It got worse as the day went. My friends were a little worried about how weird I was acting. I walked home after school, listening to my headphones as usual, but I still kept hearing someone call my name. The music made it worse. Whatever I was hearing was already kind of muffled and having a song playing in my ears only seemed to obscure it more. When I finally got home, I told my mom I wasn't feeling well, went to my room and went straight to sleep, at 4 in the afternoon. As nodded off, I heard that voice calling for me again, making me jerk out of my sleep. This repeated a couple times until I convinced myself that I already told my mom I was sick and if she really needed me, she could come get me. I finally went to sleep and didn't wake until 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and then went to sleep afterwards again until 9 a.m. the next day. I was an idiot. I had really bad sleep problems for years. At one point I went to a party having been awake for 36 hours when arriving. I didn't really hallucinate also because I couldn't sleep, but when I finally did, I got the sleep I needed. The problem was mostly falling asleep. For me, stress and lack of sleep triggers some form of sleep paralysis and these weird dreams where I'm lying down somewhere and I can't see properly and I can't get up because everything is just so blurry and spinning around. It made me wake up in cold sweats and I remember once waking up and falling back asleep so many times because I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open, that I called my mom crying because I did not know whether I was awake or not. I'm better now. It's almost a regular occurrence for me by now because I suffer from insomnia. There are 3 different types of hallucinations for me: funny, useless shit I know is fake. Shit that could be real or not. Extremely scary and traumatic shit I know is fake but rattles me up every single time. Usually, they appear in that order. Pro tip: if you are experiencing visual hallucinations and you aren't sure whether something is real or not, take a photo with your smartphone and look at that. It is very unlikely that you hallucinate the same shit twice and in the exact same position. Works for me, at last. Edit: holy son of a biscuit eater. This just about blew up in a matter of hours. I received a handful of genuinely interested people's questions and I'll try to answer all of them, should I receive even more. To most of them, I already replied. We'll continue later. Because, as I am typing this, I am awake at an hour I should not be awake. So I'll try and get some more shut-eye. Imagine the irony. So in training to join the British Army Infantry everyone does a defense exercise. Basically you deploy onto the area then spend 72 straight hours digging trenches, no sleep, no rest. It's a double whammy between sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Although I never hallucinated, I did pass out onto some bloke though. I did see a few blokes experience crazy stuff. One bloke walked into a foggy field and was missing for hours. Once he realized he was lost he led on the floor, flipping between the channels on his radio saying, hello, and hoping someone would hear him. Another bloke who was a Welsh speaker, lost the ability to distinguish between the two languages. He'd speak to you in Welsh, then get annoyed when you didn't understand him, believing he was speaking perfect English. Once in my early 20s I took acid and didn't sleep at all for like 3 days. At one point on the third day a door told me to go fuck myself and I really wasn't sure if it was from the drugs building up over time or because I was so tired. I guess there's some confusion over the wording but this was not one dose. This was multiple redoses over the course of 3 days with diminishing returns. Marine boot camp keeps you awake for the first 3 days straight and if you fell asleep you'd get fucked up real quick by the drill instructors. After 48 hours I started hallucinating lights, swirls in my vision and had to mentally keep myself awake while doing absolutely nothing most of the time there. Dozing off for even a second was a death sentence so had good motivation. When I finally got to sleep I was woken up an hour into it by a rack mate because I had firewatch and I could have sworn it was my dad like 100%. I hallucinated my father waking me up because I was so tired, lost, confused. Oh, I have a great cautionary tale for this. Me, 19, freshly sent to Japan for the USAF. A little pretext here. Japan is famous for the car culture there, and it inspires hundreds of thousands of people. One particular multi-track circuit that is incredibly famous is called Ebisu Circuit and it has a festival a few times a year called Drift Matsuri. This particular event draws drivers and spectators from around the world to thrash their cars for 72 hours straight for one cheap price. Influences fly in and buy a car for the week a lot, and it's as important. I can't remember what caused me to stay up all night. I might have been gaming or I might have been studying, but it was Matsuri weekend at Ebisu and Adam LZ, famous drift YouTuber, was gonna be there with Taylor Ray. With Elisha being just around 150 kilometers away, I started my car and set out on my journey. I had never used the tolls before so I ended up driving 7 hours instead of the originally predicted 3. I was also freshly imported into Japan and had yet to take my car on a true drive through the Japanese country so I trucked on through single-lane roads through rice paddies and small mountain villages. Honestly not the kind of place my drift car was suited for but it was dope. I ended up getting to the circuit at like 3:30, met the crew and hung out for a while, practiced on the skid pad, but I had to get back to base before 12. I stayed for an hour and turned around and went home. I had been awake for close to 64 hours at that point. I really didn't have any issues until about 10:30, back in the thick concrete jungle of Tokyo. I had a few hallucinations, but the worst was where I drove my car into a hole in the middle of the road. I was out for at least a few seconds, probably sleeping. I am fortunate that the roads were next to empty around me, but I could have died that night and everyone around me was in danger. Do yourself and everyone around you a favor. Don't drive tired. Visions. People existing where they shouldn't be. Like walking across rafters and ducts high above factory floors. Memory loss. Irritability like you've never been through before. Pain. You lose time. An hour here. An hour there. Your cognitive abilities decline. I've gone week-long stretches where I probably averaged between 10 to 15 hours sleep over a 7-day period so many times that it became normal. It wasn't that the stretches themselves were long. Maybe 20 hours at most. But there was no deep sleep in the downtime. Without deep sleep, you start to go mad. And I've been pretty close to going over the edge. I once worked a 17-hour shift. I was working an event for a cocktail company. Work started early in the morning, and I drove about 30 minutes to their company premises. The event was a private wedding in a field, and we were a pop-up cocktail bar. After loading all the fresh fruit onto the van, I was driven about an hour away to the venue, where we unloaded the van. We had to physically set up a metal bar, stock it up, prep ingredients, decorate it, and get all the glassware ready. People started ordering drinks at 3 p.m. and it went on late into the night. Although we had breaks, we were on our feet all night. The person in charge of our van had forgotten to pack a light, so we loaded the van back up in the dark, almost ran over one of the guests who had passed out in the middle of the field, and I cut myself pretty badly. We got back to the barn storage at about 4 a.m., and I had to drive home. I was so worn out I was seeing cows everywhere. I kept having to stop for cows in the road, cows in the bushes on the side of the road. But none of it was real. When I eventually got to lighter roads, I stopped seeing shit that wasn't there, and I'll never put myself through something so dangerous again. Oh, you mean the shadow people? Yeah, we're acquainted. Insomnia worsened by hypomania meant I would frequently sleep 2 hours or less a night. Not uncommon to be awake 72 hours straight. Generally, it's the sensation that someone just walked past the edges of your peripheral vision, but when you turn to get a better look, there's nothing there. Have also seen black masses skitter across the floor. I was going through a lot with an abusive ex. He'd keep me up for ages, and when I could finally sleep, I would have nightmares. So I started hallucinating spiders in my ceiling, and it felt like hands were touching me. It lasted for days since the hallucinations messed up the little sleep I got. I got diagnosed with a beginning psychosis and schizotypical disorder, mostly because I didn't dare tell them about my ex, so they couldn't set a PTSD diagnosis for me. They started giving me drugs to help the psychosis, but since it was because of my ex and lack of sleep, it didn't really help, and I had to deal with just being drugged as well. Very late reply, will be buried, but fuck it, my record is 5 days awake on caffeine and Spite alone, so no drugs messing with me. It was the most nightmarish, horrifying hallucinations ever. Shadows and shadow people trying to eat me. Giant rats running at me in the corner of my vision, but disappearing when I looked. Time slows down but speeds up, so minutes seem like hours, but hours feel like seconds. I'd pass objects to people who weren't there, and as the object dropped to the floor, they just disappeared. Did I mention the giant fucking rats everywhere? I've done 5 tabs of acid at once, and it was less intense than sleep deprivation. Also a lot more pleasant. Seriously, if you want to hallucinate, just do drugs. When I was in 9th grade, my friends and I watched that one episode of Family Guy where Peter, Joe, and Quagmire try to see who can stay awake the longest. We were dumb, so we tried it. We were awake for 3 days straight, and I swear to God, I thought my head had fallen off. In addition, I thought my friend was Sasquatch and trying to eat us. I freaked out so much, I had to use a bag to stop hyperventilating, I guess is the word. He's 6 feet 1 inch, 250 pounds, and he's extremely hairy. Like hairy to the point where if you brush your arm against his, you get exfoliated and carpet burn at the same time. Years ago, I went traveling on my own for the first time. I got the bus from my city to one of the airports in London. It took almost a whole day because of the changes, and then I had to wait in the airport until the next day for my flight. I ended up trying to sleep on the floor because I was too skint for a hotel. I didn't get much sleep. So the next day I get on my flight and I'm dipping in and out of sleep the whole time. I hallucinated that there was a Shiba Inu on the plane. I thought, oh, that's strange that they're letting a dog walk about the plane. Then I saw a cow on the wing. Oh, that's really strange. I don't suggest doing this at all. But my first one is a little more funny than scary. I worked third shift at a gas station for 6 years. Didn't sleep for 3 days due to insomnia. I was so out of it, I thought there was a purple unicorn named Hugo chilling in the back office, watching me on the cameras and smoking cigarettes.
Hugo the purple unicorn would come out and tell me about Philip,
the red rhino, taking his business. That's when I knew I needed sleep. Mind you, Hugo the purple unicorn and Philip the red rhino were cartoonish. Kind of like Space Jam. Another experience I had was black liquid dripping from everyone's faces. I always made sure to get enough sleep after that experience. I had an epic series of plane, train and subway cancellations that left me awake and in transit for 3.5 days. There was a big storm over the Midwest that just knocked out everything I needed to get home. By the end of day 3, my vision was full of shimmering gold hexagons, kinda like when you rub your eyes or squeeze them closed hard, but just the lower half of my field of vision and wouldn't go away. I could hear a roar of talk and laughter, like thousands of people were around me, but it was just a couple of old sleepy people near me at the station. I phoned my mom and told her about this. She said I was exhausted, and it stopped for a while. When my daughter was born, I had what I imagine is pretty standard new parent sleep deprivation. Let's just say I did not handle it well. Several times I would get to sleep, I would wake up not knowing where the baby was and having short panic attacks. The worst night, I woke up holding my pillow in my arms thinking I was rocking the baby. My eyes were blurry, but I could see there was something covering her head, pillowcase. I couldn't get it off and I started panicking thinking my baby was suffocating. I ended up ripping my pillow into shreds trying to get my baby out when my wife walks in from the other room holding the baby and asking what the hell I was doing. I was driving to Denver from St. Louis and we decided to start driving at night. Fast forward a couple hours later and we're in the middle of Kansas in the middle of the night driving through a thunderstorm. Visibility was extremely low. I was so tired that I started thinking we constantly driving under a overpass. Over and over again I would look up and think we going under overpasses. It was so freaky. Finally I was able to pull over at a gas station and get a couple hours rest. I was convinced someone was at the door and people were walking around my house. I was completely by myself. Edit. My stomach noises caused my heart to literally stop. I froze and almost stopped breathing because I thought someone was there. These nights were the scariest of my life. A very scary time. I was afraid to leave my room to use the bathroom during the night because I saw shadow people, felt them staring at me and heard them talking. Had a bad kidney infection, can cause confusion, and missed loads of sleep while working an intense job, living alone in a dodgy area. Moved to the city for university, lived in a creepy, cold house with no heating so the shower was freezing. I couldn't sleep because I was so afraid of being in the house alone, in an area where there are many break-ins. I was convinced there were people at the front door or sitting in the living room. Birth of our 5th daughter. My wife is in labor 30 hours. I stay awake for all of it, just in case. Baby arrives at 6 a.m. I pick up the other 4 to meet their new sister, followed by 2 hours catching up at the office, then back to the hospital for my wife's tubal ligation. Pick up the girls from school, get them supper. We're all back at the hospital till 8 o'clock. I've been up for 42 hours. Head home, get everyone settled, and crash. Had this weird half-asleep, half-awake thing going, and I hallucinated that my arms and legs had fallen off, and I couldn't figure out how to reattach them because, well, my arms had fallen off. It took me 3 nights to get my sleep cycle back. 100% do not recommend. At 72 hours I still had energy, excessive energy. Hopped on a backpack with cookbooks stuffed in, walked 8 miles with flip-flops. Ended up being picked up by police because I was screaming in a field. Collapsed as they approached. Woke up in a hospital with them giving me a cocktail of meds. Moral of the story, don't have a mental break. Most I've done is about 78 hours. Around the 2-day mark one started hearing my name whispered but no one there. I started seeing shadow people from the corner of my eye. I started seeing the shadow people right in front of me. I remember seeing a shadow man running straight at me and screaming my name. He disappeared right before he would have hit me. That drove me to get some sleep. Army guys will know. I did a approximately 115-hour shift as senior scout during a training event at Fort Polk, Louisiana, JRTC, in August. More or less, it is a stress test training event for Army units. I was lead truck for hundreds of vehicles going into the box. The first 48 hours awake wasn't horrible since I was used to that level. But after 72 hours it got sketchy. Cigarettes no longer helped. Hallucinated while looking through night vision devices and scopes. Could barely read or type on my JCR. Slurred my words like a drunk. Helmet bobbing non-stop. Apathetic to being found by the enemy. At hour 112-ish I went to the command post to protest. I pissed myself and threw a tantrum like a 2-year-old. They called an 8-hour pause. Once I awoke I was emotionally praised by my Joes. Pissed pants. No regrets.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video. And if you are new, subscribe and click on the bell icon.